Hey everyone, Eloy and Danielle here with Pastor Pablo. Today we're going to continue on the series of breaking down the big miracles that everyone tends to know about. And specifically the one we're going to go through today is the feeding of 5,000.
Yep.
Now there's two stories in the Gospels about feeding of multiple people with different amounts of with different amounts of food. But the one we're going to cover today is specifically found in, where are they found?
Matthew 14, Mark 6.
Matthew 14 and Mark 6. Now, because that's the one that most people tend to know about. The second one is 4,000.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now then, what's really interesting is when you look at the text, it's actually 5,000 men. So that was a number not including women and children.
Yeah.
So that's quite a lot of people that would have been fed.
Yeah, it's
right?
a lot.
Yeah, it really would have been a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So the big question then is, how is this miracle relevant or applicable to us, or to understand it from a new believer's point of view?
Mm-hmm.
But what we're just going to start by reading out the Matthew version.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens before is quite important to understanding a bit more the context of the miracle. We're not going to read from the beginning of Matthew, but in the beginning of Matthew 14, it goes into the beheading of John the Baptist. John the Baptist was just beheaded, and then after this is when the feeding miracle happened. Now, for those of you that don't know, John the Baptist was a prophet that was prophesied in Isaiah would come before declaring the arrival of the Messiah. Yeah. And that's what John did. He taught the baptism of water. And we see it in Luke 1, where when the two mothers, when they were pregnant, when they met, John jumped for joy inside of her womb because he recognized Jesus. Mm-hmm. So in the spirit and soul, they recognized each other even before they were born. So there would have been a very close relationship between them there. So he would have been upset when he heard the news about John. But do you want to read it out?
Sure. So we'll start from Matthew 14:14, and it says, So when Jesus landed, he had a huge crowd waiting for him. Seeing so many people, his heart was deeply moved with compassion toward them. So he healed all who were sick in the crowd. Later that afternoon, the disciples came to Jesus and said, It's going to be dark soon and the people are hungry, but there's nothing to eat here in the desolate place. You should send the crowds away to the nearby villages to buy themselves some food. They don't need to leave, Jesus responded. You can give them something to eat. They answered, But all we have is 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Let me have them, Jesus replied. Then he had everyone sit down on the grass as he took the 5 loaves and 2 fish. He looked up into heaven, gave thanks to God, and broke the bread into pieces. He then gave it to his disciples, who in turn gave it to the crowds. Everyone ate until they were satisfied, for the food was multiplied in front of their eyes. They picked up the leftovers and filled up 12 baskets full. There were about 5,000 men who were fed, in addition to many women and children.
So quite a cool miracle, because you see provision for so many people. I think like one of the ways to really try and understand this miracle a bit more is just to put yourself in the feet of the people. That during the time, it wasn't like today where people have Instagram, Netflix, they have so many distractions. Mm-hmm. During the Jewish times 2,000 years ago, their central focus was around religion. It was around the synagogue and around praising and worshiping God. That if they weren't out working their fields or trading, they would then be sat around the synagogue having scriptural debates or trying to work out how they can please God more and more and more. So the beheading of a prophet such as John would have been quite a sad thing for a lot of people. That a lot of people did flock to John. And we see that because if you read earlier, Herod, who beheaded John, was actually scared to behead John. He didn't want to kill John because he was scared of the uproar of the people. That the people would be upset and grieved because they really did know and believe that he was an anointed man of God. Yeah. He lived off locusts and honey. Like, would you like to eat a diet of locusts and honey?
Honey's pretty good. I'll take a bit of honey.
Crunchy locust to dip it in, like
Probably
basically not. It's like a carrot stick.
Basically like a date. This is my beef with dates.
A date is not like a locust.
Dates are like locusts. I can't eat dates. They are. They're all crunchy like locusts. They are. All right, let's move on before people start judging me.
What dates are you eating? They're crunchy like a locust.
You buy us.
I've never bought any of them crunchy ones. I'm trying to buy some of them nice crunchy ones, but I can't find them. So the people were moved. Now, you see it a little bit earlier on. You see it in 14:13. When Jesus heard what happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. So he heard what just happened about John the Baptist, and he was moved, he was upset. He left to a solitary place. So he went to the middle of nowhere. Now, oh dear, I lost the bookmark. But people followed him on foot from the towns. So Jesus has tried to leave and go, right, I'm upset, my brother's just been beheaded, let me just go have some quiet time with God. And yet people will still go and flock to him during their time of need. They just had their prophet beheaded and they went to find Jesus. And I think this is very symbolic today of how a lot of us are when we first try and find God or try and find Jesus. But I think it says it somewhere about only a broken heart would find Jesus. Is that right? Something like that? Help me out.
What are you trying to say here?
So about when it's only the broken-hearted.
I mean, Jesus said he came for the broken-hearted, but...
That'll do.
Is that what you meant?
Yeah. Yeah, he came to save the broken-hearted. And it's only from that position of being in a broken heart do people find God and build relationship with God. And that's when most of us start looking for God. When we realize, actually, hold on a minute, time out. This really isn't working.
Nothing in the world satisfies.
I need more. There's got to be something better than just this life. And that's where people go to find Jesus. So I think it's a very interesting miracle. If you then put yourself in that viewpoint of you're one of those 5,000 plus that have flocked, you're in this time of need, you then see very much so the character of God and the character of Jesus displayed to you as an individual. That everything that you've seen centralized around your life as someone who would go and listen to John the Baptist preach, or you believed he was an anointed prophet, and suddenly everything that your world was built around has crumbled and destroyed. Maybe Corona has crumbled and destroyed your life. You've lost your job, you've lost your career, that something's not sitting where it used to be anymore. So you go flocking to this man called Jesus, who you hear does good things. So what do we see? What does Jesus then do to those that turn up there?
Says that he healed all who were sick. But before that, what I think is so interesting is it says that when Jesus saw them, his heart was deeply moved with compassion. And I just think that's beautiful, because you see God has emotions toward us, more emotions than we can probably comprehend. But it doesn't say anything about the people being sad. We're making the assumption that they would have been, but it doesn't tell us anything about the fact that the people were hurting or grieving or mourning. It just says that Jesus saw them. Jesus just saw the people and he had compassion for them, and I just think that's beautiful.
So what else do you then get as you go forward through it?
In which part?
The story. 15? What were you saying about the remote place?
Yep. So that then they went out into a remote place. It says it was in... it's in 15. It says the disciples were saying, There's nothing to eat here in this desolate place. You should send the crowds away to the nearby villages. And it's kind of like the disciples still didn't get it, did they? They still didn't see who Jesus was, because the people are sitting around the source of the living water.
Mm-hmm.
They're sitting around the one person that can feed them and nourish their souls, and the disciples are trying to send them away to somewhere else.
And I think that can almost be very symbolic of people's initial faith, I would guess, of the understanding, you can go there, let's say on a Sunday morning or a Friday morning here in Dubai, and go and get a little bit of listening for an hour, and then you have to go walk away to go find your own feeding. But actually, he is your source 24/7. He is your comfort 24/7. And we see that even in the most desolate of scenarios, with the most impossible of tasks, that he can provide.
Yeah. And it's just about that reliance, because the disciples were looking externally for something that was already right in front of them. They were looking for an external means to solve their problem rather than looking to their Savior.
Yeah, I think it's very, very cool, because you look at what would have been an impossible task of, you can imagine if 5,000 men came, and let's say 50% of them were married, and then so that's 7,500, and they say 50% of that married people, it would have been more than 50%, but just for numbers' sake, let's say 50% of those married people then had at least one kid.
9,000.
You're already at 9,750. So let's say easily 10,000 people. It's a lot of people. And you then go, we've got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And there was, Jesus' disciples just before this had gone out and taught, I think somewhere, no. Is that in Mark 6? We see where they went teaching?
Yeah, it is in Mark 6. That they'd just gone out to deliver people.
Yeah, so he sent out.
They returned, sorry, go on.
Yeah, they say in Mark 6 that just before the beheading, Jesus had sent out the teachings, calling the 12 to him, and they sent them out 2 by 2. So at the very least, 12 people just went out. You see in other parts in the Bible that it was 12 and then 120. I think you see that in Luke. But just his disciples that followed him, let's say there's 12 of them, 5 bits of bread and 2 fish isn't even enough for Jesus and 12 people, really.
Yeah.
They've been working all day.
Well, they've been working longer than all day, because it was previously to this, what had happened was that Jesus gathered his 12 disciples and imparted to them his authority. So Jesus, and I think this is really vital, that we see 2 things here, that Jesus has given the disciples the authority in his name, which for those of you who are already born again, you'll understand what that means to have that authority. And it says to cast out demons. And then he sent them out with these instructions. And he said, don't take anything with you, no money, no clothes. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. And whoever houses you, stay there. If they turn you away, then leave and dust your feet off, and preach the good news and cast out demons and heal the sick. And then when they came back to Jesus, they were like, oh my gosh, even the demons obey us. And they were so excited because they had the authority of Jesus, because Jesus gave it to them. And yet in this moment, they missed it. So they saw a need. And even though they just come from that situation of being able to heal, of coming from that situation of being able to cast out demons in Jesus' name, because they had that authority, they weren't using the lens, I suppose is the way to see it, of Jesus to look at the situation. They were using their earthly eyes to look at the feeding. And more than that, in this situation, they weren't alone. They actually had Jesus there. So it wasn't just the authority of the name of Jesus they had with them. They actually physically had Jesus with them. And yet still, they weren't looking at it with the right perspective. They were looking at it by saying, okay, well, we don't have anything. What can we do? There's nothing we can do. Let's send them away to someone else that can do something. Like, no, dude, you have Jesus right with you. You can do anything and all things. Don't limit God.
I think that's literally what came to me while you was talking about limiting God. That they had literally just seen healings happen. Now, very common for the scriptures, you see blind, deaf, mute, healed, leprosy healed,
Demons
flee. So they've just done all this. So they've just seen eyes grow, like eyes work. As far as they knew, eyes was sunny work.
Anyway,
and they were limiting the fact, and they thought, well, actually, why can't just God make bread grow? They knew in the scriptures that in the Old Testament there were miracles of multiplication through oil and flour, but they had a limiting belief as to what God can do.
Yeah.
And Jesus just removes that limiting belief, because does he not only feed those people with all that bread and fish, but there's, how much leftovers was there? Like 12 baskets.
Which is
symbology.
Ironically.
Symbolically, 12, because there was 12 tribes, and that's some good symbolism right there.
12 apostles.
12 apostles as well, and 12 tribes.
But it
12.
was like Jesus's, I see it, and maybe this is just my personal revelation, I see it how Jesus was showing them, because Jesus had just, Jesus had just sent them out, right? And he literally said, let's read it. He said, take only your staff and the sandals on your feet. This is Mark 6:8-9. Take only the staff and the sandals on your feet. No bread, no knapsack, no extra garments, no money. He told them, don't go out with anything. And then when they came back to him, they would have been hungry. I'm sure they would have been hungry. They've been working. They were told to take no bread, no food. And then they were then told when they said, Jesus, we need to feed them. Jesus replied to them saying, you feed them. You give them food. They don't need to leave. You give them food. And that's in Mark 14:16. So Jesus was telling them, you can do it. And they still didn't see it. So then, not only did Jesus feed those people, he fed them. He gave them the surplus. Not only did they get, the people who were there, the 5,000, maybe 10,000, however many it was, they got until they were full. But what did the disciples got? They got a whole basket each. They got more than enough. Their needs were taken care of with Jesus.
Yeah, and it's actually quite interesting, because Jesus would have known how much was there. He knows everything. And we see that with the story of the Samaritan at the well, that he knew how many husbands she had. He knows everything, so he would have known how much bread there was. So when he says it, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. He knew how much there was there, and he was testing their faith.
And what I find really interesting about this is immediately after this, in Matthew 14:22 onwards, it's when the disciples went back in the boat and they were on the ocean or the sea or whatever it was, and they were, it says a lake, and they were being tossed about by high winds and heavy seas. And it says that they were terrified, they were screaming, they were scared, and they were like, Lord, save us, what's going on? Because Jesus wasn't with them at this time. Jesus had stayed behind on the mountain to pray to God. And it's like they'd been sent out with the authority of Jesus, right, to go and heal. They'd seen that it had happened. They then come back and Jesus says, hey, remember that authority I've given you? Are you going to feed my people? And they were like, oh, we didn't get it. Okay, can you do it? So then Jesus does it.
Batman.
And then immediately after that, they're then sent out without Jesus again to test their faith. And yet again, what happens?
I think you're tangenting.
I'm tangenting,
You're tangenting
but it's
hard.
true. But then again, what happens? And I think it's an important lesson, because it just shows you that even the disciples had
and I think
areas where they lacked faith.
To bring it back to the fact of milk and back to a new believers or people understanding the depth of the miracle, it's understanding a bit more about Jesus's character. That he has compassion on people, and that people will then come to him. That even when he's somewhere far away and remote, which means he's hard to access, which for a lot of people it does feel very hard to access Jesus. As you go into a prayer life, you have to really sit in presence, in silence, to feel his presence. That he receives you. And then what does he do when he receives us? He healed everyone.
And then he fed them.
That it doesn't matter what appears to the eye, that even to the 5,000 plus, they'd have been like, where's the buffet table? Where's the barbecue at? We've been here all day. We're pretty hungry, and it's a long way back here because we've had to come all the way to this solitary place. Solitary means like a lone place, isolation. There wouldn't have been a Starbucks nearby, or I don't know what would have been in a
McDonald's.
No, like a what would have been like a little fire bakery type. I don't know. something they would have had their local fast food joint. They wouldn't have had anything.
Like they have like those shawarma type places probably.
Let's go, yeah. They wouldn't have had a chicken shawarma place. Sorry, Israel. Maybe they don't eat shawarmas. How do we know that? They might not do.
Pretty certain we've seen it.
Yeah, but that could have been an influx from the Arabic takeover culture.
I guess that's true. Yeah. But like, I think they ate bread.
They ate bread. Let's say that they bakery. Let's say bakery. Yeah. Bread. They wouldn't have had a local bakery open. It was in the middle of nowhere. And all they would have seen is, gosh, even they don't have much food, the apostles, the disciples.
They have none.
They had none, just 5 bits of bread and 2 little fish. But yeah, even from that point of view, they've gone to Jesus in a solitary place, broken-hearted. They've all been healed. And then they then see a multiplication that even past what they could imagine, that Jesus provided for them, even in the deepest, darkest place in the middle of nowhere, that Jesus will provide. And then actually, as we then go forward, we kind of go, well, through Jesus, salvation is available to all of us. Now, what does Jesus always tell us? Like, pick up our cross and follow me. Well, we see it here. The key to everything. The disciples had just complained, we have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Now, Jesus said, bring them here to me. What does it say in your version? Matthew 14:18.
Matthew 14:18. Let me have them.
Let me have them. And then, he doesn't have a word there in Mark.
What's your point, Mark?
So, what does he say here? Jesus just says, bring them here to me. Give them all to me. It's not.
It's like bring them all, bring everything.
Bring everything.
To the storehouses.
Bring everything.
How much I will multiply.
Yeah, so he's basically quoting, is it Micah? Where it says that about the storehouses that all the
I think it's Micah.
Prosperity gospel love to preach.
Yeah,
I think it's Micah. If it's wrong, the right one will come up somewhere. And he says, give me everything. So the disciples literally go, all right, well, here's everything. We've just been out on this mission without food, gold, without even slippers. And we see Jesus turn the little they have into more than they can even imagine. And on top of that, there's more left over than they even started with. Mm-hmm. But I think for people that are a bit deeper in their faith, you can almost take from this message that actually when Jesus asks, he never asks for a little bit. He says everything. He asks for everything. Yeah. And when you give him everything, what seemed impossible will be done.
Yeah.
That if Jesus says to you, feed these 5,000 people, and you're like, ooh, I've only got this much money, this much food, just give it to him and watch what he does. If he says to you, hey, start this act or do this or do that, and you're like, oh, I've only got this much time, give Jesus your time and see what he does. If he says to you, hey, clothe this person, you go, oh, I've only got this one t-shirt, give him that one t-shirt and see what Jesus does with it. And then that's when you see miracles happen. Mm-hmm. And I think we can definitely attest to that, where we've seen God ask us to feed people and we're like, oh, how are we going to feed one person? And one person's now turned into 50 odd. And it's just growing. And it's just, you give him everything you have and you just see what he's going to do with it and just have that faith. So, do you want to summarize? We've done a lot of sub-arms here.
Mm-hmm. I feel like we haven't even really touched half of it, but
no, we haven't. Yeah, I think this miracle is such a deep miracle from multiple layers, from a milk to even pre-milk, spiritual foods.
I know what you're saying, but I don't think anyone watching is going to understand what you're talking about. You're just saying the word milk.
So yeah, it has such complex layers, from a very literal miracle right down to a deeper understanding of what your journey in faith is going to look like. Mm-hmm. But from the first level, you see it as the fact that people will go to Jesus, that he heals them, and he provides.
Right, and then even the people that he calls to be his disciples, his apostles, his workers, that, sometimes you'll be put in a tough situation, and it's about remembering to keep your eyes on Jesus, not on the physical world, and not on how things look, and remembering that after your work is done, you'll get your reward.
Yep. And then also, from both sides of people a bit deeper in faith and even people new in faith, not to limit God, because from all aspects it seemed impossible. So if you're new to God and you're in this situation where you're like, I don't know how I'm going to do anything right now. I've lost my job, I've lost this, I've lost that. I don't know what I'm going to do. Yeah. You just go, well, God, if I know you fed 5,000 plus people with 5 bits of bread, I know there's nothing that you can't do. So I'm just going to give it all to you anyway. I think that's the big takeaways from feeding of 5,000, that even those who are walking had limited God at that time. And the key is not to limit God in what he can multiply in your life, as long as you go to him in that place of solitude where he is.
Yep. I think that's a good summary.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we're hoping to share with you again soon.